Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this panel on energy transition. My name is Igor Shishlov. I'm the head of climate finance at Perspectives, a German climate policy consultancy and think tank, and executive director of the Climate and Business Certificate at HEC Paris. Now, you might have seen that just yesterday, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, published its energy investment report, which shows that investments in clean energy are at their highest level, but also investments in fossil fuels are on the rise. So when it comes to the energy transition, we are kind of pressing at the same time at the accelerator and at the brake pedal. And of course, this is something that has to change and has to change rapidly. So the question we are going to tackle today is how can we accelerate the energy transition in the times of multi-crisis? We're facing the crisis where we have the war in Ukraine, rising energy prices, inflation, geopolitical tensions around trade, etc., etc. So in this context, we're going to discuss the challenges about the energy transition. And with that, I would like to introduce our dear panelists. Today, I'll do it in alphabetical order. So first, we have Camille Defard, who is the head of the Energy Center at Jacques Delors Institute. Second, we have Shedy Guiga, who is a renewable energy analyst and project manager for HEC Transition, which is a student and alumni association working on climate and energy topics at HEC Paris. And finally, we have Yamina Saheb, who is a long-standing energy expert and currently a senior researcher for the OFCE at Sciences Po, and also one of the lead authors for the IPCC. Now, to kickstart the debate, Shedy, I would like to start with you as a representative of the young generation. I know that you have quite a lot of interesting initiatives at HEC Transition with the students, so I was wondering if you can tell us a few words about it and really what's on the mind of the young generation when it comes to the energy transition.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, for starters. And so as an association for HEC Transition, we really did 2 student initiatives and with alumni also. And the first one was about the national consultation on the energy mix that took place in France a few months ago. And we wanted to really emphasize a few points that seemed very important to us. First of all, it would be that we have to end the never-ending debate about nuclear and renewables, and thinking that there is maybe not such an opposition between the two of them in the short term, because, well, if we want to build a new nuclear power plant, well, we have to wait at least 15 years, and what would we do in these 15 years? Well, we only have one solution, so we have to go very fast with this solution. And we think we have to reorient all the public policies towards very specific investments, which are, well, green investments, and stop fueling really fossil investments, specifically in France. We also think we have to increase the capacity for the new generation to be to get new skills for the energy transition, and thus create really specific and regional hub for new skills that are very much required for this transition. And maybe the most and the last point, and maybe the most important, would be that we have to stop generating new scenarios every year and every 6 months and saying, yes, we are going to follow this path or this path. We have to just choose one path today and really start acting really fast. And the second initiative was that about energy sufficiency, specifically in the short-term period. And this was really kind of the same point of view, saying we have to stop acting like we were in a crisis, because we have a crisis this year, and this year's an energy crisis. But I think we have to stop really only reacting and being in a reaction point of view and thinking that it's a crisis that we have to deal with, and start acting long-term and really seeing that in a long-term perspective.
Right, thanks. Well, some of the interesting points. Did any of these points resonate with you? Maybe Yamina first. I know that you've written quite a bit on energy sufficiency. Do you mind telling us a few things about it, what it is, why do we need it, and how can we achieve it?
Yeah, so I have written more about sufficiency than energy sufficiency. Energy sufficiency is one part of sufficiency, because sufficiency relates to all natural resources. And sufficiency is not a new concept, but unfortunately it's a concept that has not been considered in our climate policies. Just for illustration, France is the only EU and OECD country that considers energy sufficiency in its energy transition law. However, this does not mean that we have implementation decrease for sufficiency. We even have done the opposite very often. And you know that the French climate policies are EU policies. So if you don't have this in EU policies, it is unlikely that it will occur in different countries. So why sufficiency? This time in the IPCC report, the IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. This time we managed to introduce the sufficiency concept and to estimate the potential to reduce emissions if sufficiency policies would be considered. And this potential is huge. So by 2050, we could reduce global emissions up to 70% compared to 2019 if sufficiency policies are considered. But this is not the case now. And we also introduced the definition of sufficiency. So sufficiency is defined around 4 pillars. The first one is that sufficiency is a set of policy measures and daily practices. The order in which these two concepts appear is important. First, the policies. This is not what my government understood, because my government is putting pressure on behavior change of individuals. While as individuals, we are locked in the solutions that are put in place by industry because the policies allow these solutions to be in place. So this is the first thing that France does not get well, despite the fact that we have the word in our energy transition law. The second point is that these policies aim at avoiding upfront the demand for all natural resources. Energy, water, land, whatever natural resources that is used, materials. So currently France, because of the water crisis, is going also to prepare water sufficiency plans. It will be the first time. We never have done this before, but it should be for all natural resources. The third pillar is very important because it's about equality. Sufficiency is about delivering well-being for all. And in reality, sufficiency is about protecting the most vulnerable ones, because it sets the minimum that policies should provide to each of us. So it's not just about providing housing, it's about providing comfortable housing for each of us, accessible with the mobility needs, everything that is accessible. You see, this is what sufficiency does. And the fourth pillar will answer one of your points, actually. All these policies should consider planetary boundaries. We did not include carbon budget on purpose because of the way carbon budget has been used by the EU and OECD countries in setting their climate neutrality target. Planetary boundaries, there are 9 planetary boundaries. Climate change is one of them. But you also have biodiversity, you have land use, you have water, etc. So you need to look at all this when you are designing your climate policies, which is not the case today. We have a very narrow view, and because we have very narrow view, then we design policies that are not ambitious enough, that creates more problems in the future than which we do. We talk about maladaptation in climate change, but we also have malmitigation, even if the word is not used. But as of today, we have done mainly malmitigation. Why planetary boundaries matter? This will answer a question about the scenarios. Having one scenario, if we would consider the planetary boundaries, so the EU, and I will give you the example of France as well, the EU should be climate neutral by 2033, not by 2050. So this means that we have one scenario, it is climate neutrality considering planetary boundaries. And we work on the policies. This means we need ambition to be neutral by 2033. France, despite the nuclear power plants that we have, should be neutral by 2028. Germany should be by 2025, if I remember well. You see why? Because by planetary boundaries, you consider cumulative emissions, today's emissions and past emissions, while today, why do we change these scenarios all the time? Because the baseline, we decide where to put this baseline. Currently, it's 1990 for us, and then you change, depending if you have a right wing or left wing or ambitious, bit of ambitious, how green is your government? So you see, it's because we use the wrong concept for our policy, the wrong framework. That's why we have all these scenarios. The issue of the scenarios is very important because if you keep changing scenarios, then you keep changing policies. This is not stable environment for investment, actually. So it's very important to have to unleash the long-term investment. You need to have one scenario that considers planetary boundaries, but we are not yet there.
Thank you, Yamina. Quite a few things here, and indeed, I must confirm, having worked on climate policies for 10 years, that we focus very narrowly on carbon emissions, and this issue of planetary boundaries is not usually discussed. Camille, over to you. Speaking about the European climate policies, did anything resonate? Can you give us maybe some examples of what's happening in Europe?
Yeah, I think we are witnessing a change of era with the war in Ukraine and the recovery after COVID, with very high prices that remind us of the planetary boundaries, or at least some boundaries that we weren't used to. So all our infrastructures and societies, economies are have been developed based on the assumption that energy would remain cheap and abundant. And this is why we have so much energy waste today in our system. So we need to develop a more comprehensive approach around sufficiency, because of course, clean energy has a material footprint very high, higher than traditional, conventional fossil technologies. And so one of the other levers that we need to use is the energy efficiency. And so far, it has been really met more broadly the energy demand side of climate mitigation action that has been completely disregarded over the past 30 years. So we've been very much focusing on green energies, wind and renewables, and these are actually on a quite well developed pace, and they're quite developing quite fast. However, we see that investments on energy demand reduction are lagging behind, especially renovation, that is also dear to Yamina's heart. And so we see, for example, with the war in Ukraine, that we actually realized how much we delayed on our climate action on building renovation. If, just to take this sector, if we want to achieve our climate targets, we absolutely need to renovate virtually almost all buildings in the EU to the best energy class. This has excellent results on health, inclusion, education for the kids, mental health, and creates local jobs. So there has been, after recovery, the COVID recovery, a strong push in favor of renovation, very efficient renovations, but this is really hard to see it materializing on the ground. And indeed, we need one scenario to agree on. The only scenario that we can afford, actually, is to achieve climate neutrality, but we also need to have the right policies from the start. And we've just missed some opportunities at the EU level with the directive on the energy performance of buildings, which actually sets quite low standards. So there should be some renovation obligations that should create this market, but actually it should have been better if we had followed some of the recommendations of the French Citizen Climate Assembly that wanted to actually renovate all the French buildings to the best energy class by 2040. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, and maybe just a quick follow-up. Why do you think it's not happening? Because most of the economic analysis of energy efficiency tells you that it's economically attractive and you can save a lot of money on energy bills. Why aren't we doing it, actually?
It is actually a very interesting policy moment, because we see that the prices are there, so the business case is here, but the problem is that there's other barriers than the price signal. And this is unfortunate that the EU level, at the EU level, we usually use the price signal and carbon pricing to trigger these investments, The problem is that the renovation market is very much fragmented with small enterprises. The lack of skills, as you were mentioning, is also there. But there's also this issue of social justice. Deep renovation requires 40,000 euros investments that many families absolutely cannot afford, despite the climate, economic and social benefits. Therefore, there's also, I think, the question that the era we are entering now with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of structural changes that we need to do requires more collective action. Collective action, of course, at the EU level to leave no member state behind, but also more specifically at the national and very local level as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, Shedy, back to you. You know, HEC is an international business school, and I'm sure you've had in your associations, you have a lot of discussions with people from all over the world. I wanted to touch a little bit on the international aspects of the energy transition. What are some of the topics related to that you've been discussing?
The first that comes to my mind, I think it's one of the most important, is that, well, it's nice that the EU becomes green by 2050. It's really, I mean, it's nice, but it's almost useless. I mean, if only the EU is green, is net zero by 2050, if France is net zero, if all these countries are net zero, well, almost anything, nothing else has changed, actually. If this is the only objective, we will be very, very, very far from the planetary goal. And if we also include the planetary boundaries that you've talked about, we will be like nothing happened in 30 years. If this is the only goal, that cannot be a solution. So that's why one of our focuses in these works that we did with the students is to really get back in the center of the topic, that is net zero has to be a planetary objective and not at all only a country or a specific continent or region or a political region. And maybe if I should put a phrase on this, it would be a sort of diplomatic greenwashing, because that would be really, really nice, I mean, politically and diplomatically, to say, yes, we've achieved neutrality in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever country you are, but this really doesn't answer the question. The question is not at all you as a country or as an individual being carbon neutral. It's very far from the objective, and that's something that we are very, very sad about, actually. So we think as a powerful, as a diplomatically very powerful country, in France, but also the EU, which is way more powerful at some levels, we have to act really stronger about this on the international level and start maybe looking at what European actors, European industries are doing abroad, and not only on our continent, because they are one of the main actors of the fossil investments in the world. And being net zero again in the EU, while you have economic actors that are acting very negatively in a way from this perspective, is something that I find very unfulfilling in a global perspective. So yeah, that's, I think, the most important thing.
Yeah, I think you raised a very important point, and we've seen last year in the wake of the energy crisis what we call this dash for gas. You know, to diversify gas supplies, there are increasing investments in new gas infrastructure abroad with the involvement of a lot of European companies and also financial institutions. We've seen export credit agencies supporting these investments, and actually we've seen a number of rollbacks in terms of commitments. In COP26 in Glasgow, there were commitments to essentially seize international public finance for fossil fuels, but in the case of several countries, there was a rollback. Yamina, does it resonate with you? I know that you've looked into this topic as well, and you've looked into you know, some of the factors that actually support fossil fuel investments abroad, like investment treaty protection and things like that. Would you like to share your views?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work on the Energy Charter Treaty, which was unknown until 2018. Actually, we have forgotten about it, so my generation did not know about it. Which is a treaty that was launched by the EU countries. At that time, we were only 15 after the collapse of the Soviet Union to protect investment of our energy companies like Total, BP, Shell, etc. When investing in the emerging republics from the collapse of the Soviet Union. Of course, I like when you say the diplomatic greenwashing. So the official discourse is about balancing economic balance between the East and the West and collaboration, etc. But all this is diplomacy. In practice, it was about protecting our investment of our companies. And at that time, many of them were partly publicly owned in these countries. And the protection goes through what we call private arbitration. Private arbitration is a parallel justice system to the system that we know. It was originally put in place, invented by the Dutch colleagues when they had to decolonize, and then they thought that, oh, we are not going to leave these countries with all their resources. We need to protect our use of these resources. And the argument was that in these countries you don't have, the justice system is not independent from the political system. You don't have separation between the two, and that's why we need something parallel that is independent. And what happens in the private arbitration is that, in my case, I am French citizen. And under this treaty, I would be considered as foreign citizen, foreign investor in Germany, for example. So if I invest in Germany, and then the German government decides, for example, to end subsidies that I had benefited of these subsidies, or to put cap on energy prices to avoid energy poverty, for example. So this treaty allows me, as a French foreign investor in Germany, to sue the German government, and in reality we should say to sue the German citizen and to ask for billions of euros of compensation, because to compensate me for the expected profit, not just for what I have invested, but the expected profit that I have calculated based on assumptions that were not known to anyone, that were not agreed democratically. So basically this treaty is against our democratic system. It's against, because then this means that governments became powerless with this treaty. And we have been working on there has been process to modernize this treaty, and my conclusion was that we cannot modernize this treaty, because to modernize this treaty, this means you need to end protection of investment in fossil fuels. That's to make it Paris compatible. But this is not possible because some of the countries party to this treaty make income out of fossil fuels. And there is no reason why France would go to another country making income from fossil fuels saying that you must stop now. There is no process to do that. So that's why, and to vote this change, this kind of changes, you need unanimity vote from all the countries. And this is not possible with some of the countries. Oh, and of course, even within the EU, we have countries, they are transit countries for fossil fuels. That's why they would not agree. And that's why I started working on the withdrawal of EU countries from this treaty. So far, we succeeded to have 9 EU countries withdrawing. But as EU countries, we are party to this treaty twice, as member state and as an EU. Now, we don't have yet the withdrawal of the EU. We need to have the withdrawal of the EU because when you withdraw from the... So France withdrew in December. They sent the notification in December last year. The withdrawal will be effective in December 2023. However, when we withdraw, this will unleash the sunset clause, which extend the protection of all the investment made before December 2023 for 20 years more. And this is the period where we must divest from fossil fuels. We must end fossil fuels. And that's why we need the withdrawal of all EU countries, because if we have the withdrawal of the EU, then we can have an agreement between ourselves to cancel the sunset clause. And in our case, more than 60% of what is considered as foreign investment under this treaty, as I told you, as French, I would be foreign under this treaty in Germany, then will no longer be protected. more than 60%, it's the least risky option. This is one reason why we need the EU withdrawal, but there is another reason why we need the EU withdrawal, because we are fueling this treaty, and one of Russia was party to this treaty, and Russia withdrew in 2009. Since the withdrawal of Russia, they have been trying to have party to this treaty countries with large fossil fuel reserves, like African countries, like, for example, Uganda. And we are paying for this extension with EU taxpayers. So by withdrawing EU countries, there will be no extension. I do think that by withdrawing, but if the EU withdraw, then this treaty will die by itself, because we have been fueling this treaty. This kind of trade agreement, we were not used to look at this kind of trade agreement in the climate policy bubble. So when I did come up to the IPCC with this treaty, the chapter on international agreement, international collaboration, and I was there, and I was talking about this treaty, people were saying, what is she talking about? What is that? And for example, I spent most of my career working on energy efficiency at the EU level, so I think I can say that I am part of the energy efficiency community. I never succeeded to have any position paper from the famous energy efficiency community in the EU, because we don't make this link. And looking beyond the nitty-gritty details of energy efficiency is highly important, because we have plenty of flocking situations that we don't know. And this was one of the discoveries that we had.
Very interesting. I mean, that actually rings the bell, because there's been so many things that we actually overlooked in climate policy debates. In my case, in my research, it was the export credit agencies, which I haven't heard a lot about, but then I figured out that these are institutions that provide a lot of support to fossil fuel infrastructure projects abroad, and they are very intransparent. We don't really know about their climate impact, and the amount of financial support, and that's public money, that they're providing is actually comparable to multilateral development banks. So we start to uncover some of these things that were designed for maybe other reasons back in the days, but that are now detrimental to implementing climate policies. All right, maybe let's switch gears. Camille, back to Europe. What are some of the other challenges that we are facing in Europe when we talk about the energy transition?
Yeah, but first I wanted to thank Yamina for her work on this very obscure treaty that actually was completely disregarded. And I think this is a very important point, that we have to change a system, and then therefore have a systemic view of all the interlinkages between all these files. And this is something that is really hard to achieve for our small brains, because you have to have this very holistic perspective on a very complex system. Therefore, I think I would like to just restate the fact that we really need more collective intelligence to address these issues. And I think that's one of the greatest challenge that we're facing, is that the social justice element of the transition that also has been disregarded in the past. And if we don't change the way we decide upon policies, we will just reflect the inequalities that are currently occurring in our society. And we are actually going to enter a phase of Green Deal implementation in a year. We were about to enter the election campaign for the next European elections in 2024, and we have some very unpopular provisions in the Fit for 55 package, so the new energy set of laws at the EU level that will go down to member states and be implemented. For example, the ban on thermal cars, conventional cars, that will actually impact jobs and people's lifestyles as well. And therefore, there's a need to really take these difficulties into account, and also acknowledge the fact that most of the population and some of the businesses also need some support to change, some technical advice, some appropriate financial support. And that also, because we are short of funding, it also means digging into these funds that are going to the fossil fuel industry to redirect it to clean energy. And there are actually a lot of public funds that are currently supporting a system that is detrimental to all of us. One last point maybe on this need for collective action. There's also the need to reskill and potentially enhance the workforce, not only in the private sector, in clean sectors, but also in the administration. because we see that we'll need new renewable projects that need to respect environmental standards. There is also potentially the need to expand green manufacturing in Europe, and that needs to be made in taking into account the highest environmental standards as we can. And one last point, we need to reshore some of the activities that will be required to develop clean technologies. The European Commission wants to relaunch the local mining, domestic mining, for the sake of energy security. I'm not against that idea, but we need to be very clear that there is no sustainable mining. All mining activities will have a very high environmental impacts, potentially high social impacts, and we need to have a debate on how to address these impacts and what will this mineral be used for. If it is to build very expensive SUVs that are just for a small share of the population, these mining projects will never be accepted by the rest of the population, and we risk a very strong backlash, both socially and politically, against our green policies.
Right, I think the dimension of just transition is really important, and without taking into account this implications, especially for the poorer parts of the population, it's not going to be possible. So thank you really for raising this question. Now I think we still have a few minutes for questions from the audience, unless anybody wants to react, an immediate reaction. No? Then we can open the floor. Do we have any questions? I don't know if there is a roaming mic in the room. Yes, I think there's a microphone. Yeah, question in the back.
No, it was just a remark about the critical metals and the whole debate there is around this. And I'm afraid
can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, Alexandre Char. I work at the Treasury, the French, the government. Right now we're working a lot on the critical metals funds and how to have to provision ourselves with those. And I really feel that sometimes we have this argument saying, oh, we have to open mines and this is not sustainable and this is bad for the environment, so this is a good reason for not investing in green energy and stuff. And we sometimes forget that this is a tiny part of the whole metals and the whole materials we extract from the floor, from the ground, for many other activities that are not sustainable, and we don't really talk about it. And it's huge. Just imagine the whole oil and gas we extract from the soil, but also for smartphones or for cars and stuff. So sometimes I really feel that the fact that we extract minerals for batteries and to build windmills and stuff can be a bad argument for not doing this, not doing those kind of investments.
Thanks for the comment. Well, I guess in many cases it's not really about not doing it, but it's about doing it in a responsible way, right? Because we've seen all the problems associated with mining in the past, and we want to avoid them. We know that there will be need for mining for the energy transition, right? Yamina.
Maybe her example of SUV is a good example, because actually as citizen, and it links to sufficiency and planetary boundaries. So as citizen, we have a need we have mobility need. We don't have an SUV need as a citizen. Your need is to move from point A to point B whenever you would like to need, or whenever you need to move. And the answer that has been put in place by the industry through the policies has been cars, but this is only since 1930, and in the case of the EU after the Second War. And then they sold to us the idea that if you have an individual car, this means that you are free. So your freedom is related to garbage, basically. But this is the idea that they sold to us. They never show people in the cars waiting and hours and arriving late, and they are pissed off, etc. They always show them they are very happy, sunny place, and things like that. You see? And then we forgot, and this is what sufficiency brings back, is about the needs. So policies should be about the needs of the people, the citizens, and all citizens, and not just the richest ones. And then I'm not about just what efficiency does, is just improving the solution that is already there. In the case of efficiency, so we try to make the cars as efficient as possible, And there has been an important and very big mistake in the efficiency community 30 years ago. They did not look at, they used only one indicator, which is the ratio. So this means this is what allowed to have bigger cars. Because basically...
That's a famous rebound effect.
Exactly. So basically, industry did not really innovate because there are only few innovations, only very few innovations in the last 30 years. And policies did not push for this innovation. What industry did is that they made everything bigger. By making everything bigger, then it looks more efficient, but the overall consumption is higher. Because a bigger fridge could be much more efficient than the small, only the compressor, etc. But then the overall fridge will consume more energy because if you have higher volume, more volume, then you consume more. And this is why we end up, and there is an excellent report from the International Energy Agency about all the materials that is needed for electrical vehicles. So this is how we end up in a situation where then making them efficient and then to decarbonize the supply through electricity with the assumption that electricity will be green, which is just an assumption. There is no verification for that. There is no, and it's impossible to reach that for all the cars. So basically going back to the fundamentals, this is what we need to bring in the policies. This is what is missing. And that's why I give you just two figures from the latest IPCC report. Between 2010 and 2020, the share of global greenhouse gas emissions that are covered by regulations have more than doubled. They were 20% in 2010. We were at 52% in 2020. So if I say this to my students, I do that with my students at Sciences Po. So what will be the consequence of that? So your answer would be that so emissions went down. No, in the same period, emissions went every year, the global emissions increased by 1.3% per year. So obviously we are doing something wrong.
Yeah, I guess the question is what kind of regulations are covering these emissions? Are we talking about carbon pricing, and what level of carbon pricing is it sufficient to drive emissions down, and other types of policies, you know?
Yeah, so we had, because we did not question, we did not work on the mobility of the people, we worked on improving this solution. The policies that we have emission, how is it called, the regulation that we have? So we have like a directive for emissions,
right.
The emissions level, and then we have subsidies to buy most efficient ones, even if they are fossil fuels one, and things like that. So, but we have the starting point, we did not start where we should have started. We started at the wrong point, and all what you have done later on is wrong. There is, it's from a German colleague who explained that efficiency is about doing things right, and sufficiency is about doing the right things. So if you are doing something wrong right, this is what we have done, you will be wrong. And this is why we end up here.
And maybe as a follow-up, Camille, do we have examples from other sectors of this kind of tensions?
I mean, these tensions are everywhere. I think because we have been also growing up in societies where the representation of a good life is based on a high consumption lifestyle and high fossil fuel consumption lifestyle, with a lot of marketing around short, very cheap flights, to Thailand, and that is actually strongly, deeply entrenched now in our representations. So meaning that it is going to be really hard also to change these social norms, and that comes back to this idea of asking more to those who can do more, to those who enjoyed it more, to have a socially just transition. And I think that the remark on the fact that, of course, mining is better potentially than just drilling for oil or gas, for sure, but this is exactly why we need to have this debate, very open debate, where everybody can participate and ask the questions that we need to answer. So what do we do with the limited amount of clean energy that we're going to have? And that comes back to your points, Yamina.
Just a quick point. I totally agree with the fact that, about the narrative, actually. The fact that we're a narrative that promotes fossil consumption. Actually, we have to create, first of all, a new narrative, I think, that we will be able to live in and to fulfill one of the needs that you didn't mention, I think, is the needs of the mind, psychological needs. For example, if all my friends have SUVs, I will want to have an SUV, even if I know and I think it's not good. It's very basic. You can fight it, but it's more difficult if everyone else has this thing, but you cannot have it or don't want to buy one. So it's also a matter of creating and implementing a new narrative, I think.
We will have for sure to ban some of the solutions and the practices. I was last year invited at French TV, and I was asked about private jet, and I said, this will be banned. And the lady was shocked that I was saying that it will be banned. It's not, and then she said, you will ban them? I said, no, not me. It's just that the planet is no longer capable of supporting our emissions, and then they will be banned. And then we had the question about the playing golf. And you see in the French water plan, there is a point, it's not about banning them. For the time being, the government is a bit careful. It's about reducing water consumption by 80%. If it's 80%, most of the golf places, from my understanding of the golf places, will not be functioning, you see? But we will arrive to the situation where we will have to ban. I think the point that you were mentioning is about, we know that the planetary boundaries is something we cannot play with. We cannot extend them. We cannot. Technologies will not extend planetary boundaries. The question for us is, are we going, and I think you mentioned that earlier as well, are we going to work now on respecting the planetary boundaries now, and we still have a bit of time to do the right things, or are we going to wait until it's too late, and then we will not be able to debate? Today we are debating. Today, when I say we will have to ban plenty of things, SUVs should be banned, and they will be banned. I don't know when, and it's not me who will do it. So people are shocked because I'm saying that, but because today we can debate it. But in the future, and unfortunately this future is more near than what we thought before, we will not have time to debate it. They will just, no one, if you would be running in your SUV, you will not even try to show up with your SUV because people will jump on you. You see, this is what is going to happen. No one is going to run its golf place because if there is no water to drink, do you really think if you don't have water for your kids that you would allow the guy who has golf somewhere to use the water of your city? No, you see?
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing some of this mindset changes. For example, with flight shaming, people flying short distances or flying for just a weekend somewhere in Mallorca. There's a change in mindset that was definitely not there, 5-10 years ago. Yeah, Camille, you wanted to say something.
Just to follow up on this very important point, I think there is a need for more regulation because we cannot just rely on behavior because if all my friends are just buying these things, why wouldn't I, and at some point it's not sustainable to just rely on willingness, yeah, exactly, on individual strength of action, and therefore we need policies. And for that, I think there's very promising solutions that lie in deliberative democracy with citizen assemblies that actually have been proved to be much more ambitious than our parliaments and governments. So I think there's a lot of hope for that collective action at that stage, where we could actually rely more on people's deliberative process and come up with the stronger solution. I think they are more socially acceptable than we usually are told.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I see there is a question in the audience. Maybe we can take one last question. We have 2.5 minutes left. Can we have a microphone, please?
Hello, I just have a question for Yamina. I'm Marie-Pierre from HEC. If you had a magic stick, I would like to know, and you were at the AU and you could implement a regulation, which one would you implement and it would work? That's my question to you.
So there is no magic stick.
Imagine you had one.
So if there is one thing that we should change in the EU, what is missing actually is to consider sufficiency policies because we estimated that we could reduce emissions, the global emissions, by around 70%. In the case of the EU, I did calculations for residential buildings. We missed the opportunity to reduce emissions of residential buildings in the last 30 years by 30% because we did not include sufficiency. But to do that, I do think, my dream actually, it's not a magic stick, it's my dream, is to have an EU citizen assembly that would have the power to do things, not like the French citizen, the powerless French citizen assembly. So it was a good idea that we started this, but then it ended badly. But because if you have citizens empowered, when you explain to citizens, I do that very often, when you explain the situations, so citizens are very much about sustainable and good life for themselves and their kids. So they don't care about the profit of shareholders. So empowering citizens would be my dream.
Thank you.
Very good question. Maybe just to conclude, what about you guys? What would be your magic stick? If any.
Yeah. Actually, I think, well, this is very, very important to listen to what citizens think. If you read the French Citizen Assembly, I think Convention Citoyenne pour le Climat, right? Well, I was shocked at how much, well, they all agreed on very, very good measures to be implemented there. It's a huge majority of them agreeing on many, many, many very important measures. So we just have to do it. You know, it's very simple. It's making things happen through democracy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think once we fix the governance and institution issues, then we'll have the right policies, and we have the solutions already. We just need to implement it.
So we need to be bolder, all of us. Exactly. All of us present in this room. Well, let's thank this panel, and thank you very much for being here today with us to discuss energy transition. Thank you all.